And let me just say, and this is all by way of introduction, and I pray everyone will be patient with me as I set the stage. Let me just say, when I began in ministry a few decades ago now, I ministered in hundreds of churches, home fellowships, women's groups, even some men's groups, and every week I would pile in my small little vehicle with a 12-string guitar, sound equipment, audio visual, a map, of course a Bible, and head towards destinations large and small, and my audiences were enthusiastic as I shared the various kinds of themes and messages that have been presented on Understanding the Times Radio now for 16 years. And today about 90 or 95% of those doors have slammed shut. And it's not just indifference anymore. It is outright hostility towards topics that a few years ago generated great enthusiasm. Yes, there's small pockets of interest, and I'm so glad that they remain, but the opportunities literally continue to shrink. And we are now in the days of 2 Peter 3, the mocking and the scoffing. So how did this happen? I'm going to talk about this with two pastors, and both of them are very tuned in to the topics that you, my audience, have grown to love and follow faithfully over all these years on air and at my conferences and other places online. And one of my guests is Pastor Tom Hughes, and that's Calvary Chapel, San Jacinto, California. Tom, welcome back to the program.
Jan, it's great to be with you. Wonderful, always wonderful to talk to you.
Well, and then I bumped into a good buddy of yours, Pastor Mark Henry. He's actually from the Twin Cities, and that's from Revived Brooklyn Park Church. I'll give the website a little bit later. Mark, thank you for coming in studio.
Jan, it's a blessing. Look forward to talking about the Lord Jesus today.
You two know each other, you and Tom Hughes.
Yeah, Tom and I go back at about 10 years or so. We were both pastoring in the same town, and it's been a great bond, praying for him and his church and his ministry and collaborating together.
It's been wonderful.
Well, Tom, I'm also playing off an article you wrote, and you wrote this a while ago, but maybe a couple of years ago. It's gotten a lot of mileage, and let me just summarize it, because I think I can perhaps do it real quickly here. You wrote, at least in the last couple of years, you wrote that pastors don't touch on the topic of eschatology, end times, Israel and prophecy, current events and prophecy. And number one, you stated in the article you wrote, which I reproduced a couple of times, number one, they don't understand it. Number two, they fear offending members. Number three, they are concerned about scaring people. Number four, they fear losing the tithes if they talk about end-time events. Number five, they are afraid of being identified with the loony fringe, and such as Harold Camping, and every reason to be afraid of the loony fringe. Pastor Mark Henry, would you agree with this list that Tom Hughes has come up with?
I would actually say the first one's probably the one that I see most of the time when I ask pastors about prophecy. A lot of times they just say, I graduated from seminary, but I haven't come to really any conclusions about Bible prophecy.
Do they say if that seminary intentionally avoided teaching them?
I've never had anyone say that specifically, but that very well may be the case. I don't know.
Tom Hughes, do you know if the seminaries then are intentionally shutting this out?
I know a lot of things that I've read, Jan, and it appears that way. I haven't met with anybody specifically that has mentioned to me they went to seminary and was shut out. But I do know from pastors that I know, it's not only that they don't understand it in the reasons I originally listed in the article, but quite frankly, there's a real pushback against Bible prophecy in churches that I communicate with. They really don't want to go down that step of Bible prophecy.
Because of the reasons that I've just already read, they fear offending members, they're concerned about scaring people, etc.?
I would say that's it. But also there is this labeling of Bible prophecy as being for those who are fools. And it really falls into the category, I think you mentioned that we're in the days of 2 Peter where they'll be mocking those who are believing in the second coming of Christ. And I believe that's what's taking place in the church at large in America. Not every church is that way. Obviously, Pastor Mark's not, and neither am I. And we have some other friends and associates that aren't. But at large, it seems to be the majority of the direction of the churches.
Yeah, I would say from the pastoral side, I think it has to do something with the Bible colleges and seminaries, which we may talk about later. Mm-hmm. But I think from the church standpoint, you remember in the book of Deuteronomy, the people were warned that when God blessed them in the land, that they would forget God. And I would suggest to you the blessings we've had in America, people have forgotten God. And quite honestly, I have people say this on a fairly regular basis. I really don't want Jesus to come right now. I want to graduate from college. I want to have kids. I want to adopt somebody. I want to do this or that. There isn't this urgency, come Lord Jesus,
Amen.
like we see in persecuted situations, or I see in Africa, having preached all over Africa, where people are in great oppression, and they say, Pastor Mark, tell me what's coming next. And I just open my Bible and we read and they rejoice.
You're listening to Understanding the Times Radio. I'm Jan Markell. I have online from San Jacinto, California, Pastor Tom Hughes, and that's 412 Church in San Jacinto. I have in studio Pastor Mark Henry from Revive Brooklyn Park Church, and Revive Brooklyn Park Church used to be Brooklyn Park E-Free. If some of my Twin Cities listeners are wondering just where is that, you might remember the name of the previous, same church, just a different name. All right, I want to talk, gentlemen, something real briefly here. The cry of the young is all social justice. And as a result, young people are more troubled by injustice than they are inspired by Bible prophecy. Would that be an accurate statement, Tom Hughes? That accurate?
I would say it's accurate. I know a lot of young people. We have good outreach towards younger generation, millennials, but I would say it's really accurate. In fact, Jan, I would say this too, that sometimes when it comes to Bible prophecy teachers such as myself or Mark, there is a tendency to lean more toward just talking about what is coming and not reaching into our own communities, or in Mark's case, Mark reaches all over the world into Africa. And I think there is a label that comes with that, unfortunately, just because of not all prophecy ministries are real well balanced in that regard.
I want to play a soundbite and get the feedback from both of you. And this is Tony Campolo. And he's sort of the Pied Piper of the, I guess if you want to call it the social justice crowd. He is certainly their hero. He's the Pied Piper. And this is a little soundbite from Campolo. And he's going to say some things that actually are not, let's me put it this way, should be expected from a Tony Campolo. Let's discuss it when we're through with it.
Is we must challenge dangerous ideologies. I know that some of you are here are dispensationalists, but his purpose was to make the claim that the prophecies were to be fulfilled, that Israel would return to the Holy Land, that they would in fact own the land and have a government, and that would be the fulfillment of the Hebraic philosophies of the prophets, of the teachings of the Hebrew Bible. And the interesting thing is that not a single theologian up until John Darby ever had anything like this in his mind. I mean, if you talk about a rapture, go to Calvin, go to Luther, go to Zwingli. If you're Catholic, go to St. Thomas Aquinas, go to Augustine. There isn't a single theologian that ever had anything like this. It just came out of nowhere, and yet this has become the dominant way of thinking. And yet it legitimates land grabs. It legitimates a mindset that says taking land away from Palestinian people is legitimate.
Again, Tony Campolo, the voice for many on the left, the religious left, for the social justice crowd. He has their ear.
You know, a couple of things just come to mind. I'm listening to that is, you know, he goes back to this historical declarations of different theologians. You know, and he's right in that sense. They didn't talk about the rapture. Quite honestly, John Calvin didn't even write a commentary in the book of Revelation because he just said it's too confusing. And I would suggest to you it's not too confusing. But coming out of Catholicism, he really didn't have any other view than a kind of a amillennial, post-millennial sort of influenced view. It's not surprising. So I would suggest to you that's not the source to go to. The source to go to is the Bible.
Yeah.
The Bible speaks whatever men may think.
Well, he concludes that little soundbite by saying all of this just legitimates a land grab. In other words, he's talking about Israel. Israel has no right to the land, and this is dispensationalism justifying this land grab. Tom, your thoughts?
I can't agree with that. The Apostle Paul, if you want to talk about theologians, go all the way back to the Apostle Paul then.
Yes.
And, you know, I was raised Catholic. I get amillennial teaching, but when I came and started reading the Bible, I found out the Bible does teach this. The Apostle Paul was very specific in talking about the rapture, the term caught up or harpazo, and we have that. It is a teaching of the Bible. And when I hear this about a land grab too, Mark and I have talked about this many times over the years. God had a covenant with Abraham, and that covenant was a forever covenant, and it wasn't based upon whether or not the Jews were disobedient or obedient. God told them, if you're disobedient, I'll scatter you to the four corners of the earth, but in the last days I'll bring you back into the land because my name's on the covenant. It was an unconditional covenant in that sense. God made it with Abram when Abram was asleep. So that is just really, it's not taking the truth of the Bible, it's ignoring so many passages regarding the second coming of Christ. It's somewhat appalling to me, but then again, Peter said in the last days, scoffers would come saying, where's the promise of his coming? And this is where we're at. Unfortunately, it's infected the church.
Tom, I'm sure you would agree. He misses an important thing there, and that is all of the land is owned by God. He created all things, so therefore he's the owner of all things, and he has given to Abraham and his descendants a specific piece of property. God is going to give it to them whether anybody likes it or not. He gave it to him, sent Moses to lead the people back in there, Joshua to lead the people back in there. They were dispersed under the Mosaic covenant. They're going to come back, and Jesus is going to rule and reign there eventually. That's not a land grab. He's the king. Someone's been taking it from him. He's taking it back. He's going to give it to his people.
Amen.
Folks, let me just tell you how to get a hold of my two guests today. And I want to particularly recommend Tom Hughes, his End Times TV, and outstanding videos that he makes on eschatology at endtimestv.org, endtimestv.org. You can reach my other guests, Pastor Mark Henry, revivebrooklynpark.org. There are some other voices that are making lots of noise, and they're in the same category as this Tony Campolo, but you've got Shane Claiborne, you've got Jim Wallace, you've got the whole Christ at the Checkpoint crowd, you've got some annual events, the Justice Conference, which, good grief, a year ago they had Marxist Cornel West, but their target is evangelical young people with a heavy left emphasis on them and a heavy pro-Palestinian anti-Israel message being thrown at them, which they may not be old enough to discern the times as it concerns these people that are guest speakers.
Oh, yeah. In fact, Jan, I have a whole documentary I've been working on in refuting the whole BDS movement.
Yeah.
The boycott, divest, and sanction movement. And I've been to Catalyst Conference.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Yeah, I have. And they're interesting. It is very appealing to people who are young. And, when I think of the whole social justice, my mind goes back to the Gospel of John where Judas was upset when the perfume is broken and Jesus is anointed with it. And Jesus says, you're going to have the poor with you always. And the problem is the social justice gospel is, I look at it as the gospel of Judas. It's putting the whole social works above who Christ really is. And that's what it teaches.
Yeah, I don't know how you see that, Jan, but the social gospel technically is a redistributing of funds and opportunity and privileges to others. But I would suggest that there's really two movements. Jesus was interested in social things. I mean, he cared for people, he cared for women, the woman at the well, all of these different things. But there's a difference between the social elements in the Bible, because it's God-centered, and a humanistic centering of these things. And I don't think we have the discernment anymore to separate these things.